All right, welcome back to our session here. Our first individual speaker this afternoon is David Harris. He's going to speak on JIP 33, Standardizing Procurement Specifications, with a brief illustration of the project and an update on its progress and status. So David is Energy Transition Manager and Low Carbon Efficiency Committee Manager at IOGP, the International Association of Oil and Gas Producers. He holds a BS degree in Mechanical Engineering for Energy. He has over 28 years of experience in the energy sector, mainly in oil and gas. And with a project-oriented background, he has had various roles around the world in project management, operations, and business development, working for operators, engineering, and construction companies. And with that, David, come on up.
Thanks. I think we're just getting a last-minute correction to a slide that got inserted. So, given the time constraints, I'm part of IOGP. So, for those of you who may not know what IOGP is, we have about 100 members. About 80 of those are oil and gas producing companies. But we also have associate members from national associations, so API, NORSOC, and we have some associate members who are significant players in the oil and gas industry, so some service companies and some EPCs as well. And we do a lot of work around standardization within the industry, so we've been quite renowned for the work we've done with safety and environmental standardization within the industry. And I'm part of Joint Industry Project 33, which is around standardized procurement, and falls under the sort of engineering and standards directorate that we have within IOGP, and is part of a couple of other joint industry projects that IOGP manages. We have another joint industry project on standardization of information, and we have one with standardization of offshore structures. So JIP 33, so this kicked off in 2016, and it wasn't the idea that came about because the operators who invest in these major capital facilities in the oil and gas industry, they didn't think it was necessarily a good idea because it was their idea. This was actually something that came out of World Economic Forum, who did a study on the economics of major capital projects in oil and gas. And they came to the conclusion that the chronic late delivery of projects and the chronic cost overrun of projects was not sustainable within the industry. So Joint Industry Project 33 was put together to address some of the root causes of project overruns and delays. And that was to try to simplify the supply chain, in that instead of every project sort of redesigning the wheel every time they buy a valve or an actuator or a diesel engine or a low voltage switchgear, that we have some more standardized products that are applicable to the risks of major oil and gas facilities, that they can take off the shelf, that still require some configuration to make them adapt to your actual project, but to try to simplify the supply chain. And that would obviously have benefits across the supply chain. For the purchaser, it was intended to help get products delivered on time, and it was also hoped that it would make products more cost effective. And for the manufacturing community, it was hoped that having more standardized projects or requests for quotations come through meant there would be better inventory for you in terms of the amount of materials or the variety of materials that were being asked for, and a simpler spread in the designs that were being required. So is it possible to get the slide put up on the screen? Sorry. So that was really what was done. So let's say the project's been running for 6 years now, and so from a collaboration point of view, we've had 12 companies sponsoring the project since 2016. And what that actually translates into is we've had about 500 subject matter experts from those companies help write the specifications. We've gone out for public review of those specifications. We've had about 250 companies participate in public reviews, and that has translated into about 30,000 comments that we've had to review on the about 50 specifications that we have put through public review in our systems. We have published 58 specifications to date based off that. So we've actually been quite efficient, and our product time for us to start a specification through to delivery is about 15 months. So we are faster at actually producing a specification than a traditional standards development organization is, and we're actually looking to accelerate that quite a bit more, and if I have time I'll talk about that at the end. When I joined the project at the beginning of 2020, and back then we did not have the greatest relationship with the standards development organizations. I think they thought we were competing with them. IOGP does not see itself as a standards development organization. We try to write procurement specifications that overlay and complement existing industry standards. And we now have a very, very good relationship with API. I just had a draft come through on my email yesterday on our latest memorandum of understanding. So we're offering all our specifications to API to use the requirements in their future revisions of their specifications. And API specifications account for about 50% of the standards that we actually base our procurement specifications on. And they account for 100% of the valve and actuator specifications that we overlay. I'll show you a slide soon, but how are even though when the project was kicked off, it was aimed at new offshore capital facilities, so these were production facilities. What it's actually being applied to now is actually much wider than that, and I'll show you what our sponsoring operating companies are applying it to, but there are also other things that it's being applied to now. On the KPI side, I talked about, it was originally intended to address cost and schedule overrun. One of the things that our companies are seeing now, because they benchmark their internal engineering efficiency, so this is like how long does it take for an engineer to get a quote or a request out to a supplier and actually have a design put in place, that they're seeing our operating companies, and this would translate to an EPC company as well if they adopt it, that because we are giving them standard designs which they just need to configure, and when I say configure, so if, has anyone here ever sort of thought about buying a Porsche and gone to the Porsche website? Because it's really impressive. So, every time Porsche come out with a new car, I aspire to buy it, and I go configure the damn thing, right? And when you go to the Porsche website, there's about 20 options just for the seat. There's about 5 options for the valve cap. And overall, there must be hundreds of ways you can configure your Porsche. If you go to the Tesla website, you can choose the color, the wheels, a software package, and your interior color. That's it. There's about 4 or 5 things you can select. In JIP 33, we're trying to get to the point where how you configure the equipment is much simpler for the engineers. And that means that the designs that go through to the manufacturers are much more standardized, which means the efficiencies for the manufacturers are also much better. What else haven't I talked about on there? So in terms of the success of the project so far, because I'm sure you can understand, procurement departments in oil and gas companies aren't known for their transparency. We estimate that since about 2020, they've spent about $5 billion on JIP 33 equipment. JIP 33 equipment does not and has never been intended to cover the entire portfolio of an operator's requirements. When we speak to our member organizations, they will have between 300 and 800 product specifications in their library, depending how much they package things together within their specifications. We've produced about 58. We think we're going to top out in the low 60s, so we may be 10 to 20% of all the product specifications that are out there, but these are the ones we feel are most likely to be procured against, and the ones where there is opportunity for standardization. We are always looking for new specifications which we think are appropriate, but as I'm sure you can imagine, getting 12 companies to agree, which have very different business models and operate in very different environments, can make that a little bit challenging. And over 100,000 items have been procured to date. So we used to do it every 2 years. We're doing it every 1 year now. We do some KPIs with our sponsoring operating companies. So, and this really just asks them, where are you applying JIP 33 specs to? And we try to put it into 3 general buckets. So what we call greenfield. So these are your traditional new capital intensive facilities, whether it's an FPSO or a platform that have been built. And there's what we call pre-feed. So these are the ones that that haven't actually been blessed to go ahead. And then there's the ones that are feed and any execution. So we try to differentiate what the pipeline is looking like of what potential projects are out there that could use JIP 33, and then look at the actual pipeline of what's being used. And this is just the 12 sponsoring operating companies. 3 of the companies didn't get data to us in time, so they never made it in this particular KPI round. But the interesting thing is how the specifications are being used. So besides what they were being intended for, which was the green part of the project, a lot of the companies are now using the specifications for maintenance and upgrade of existing facilities. So this is what we call the brownfield bucket. And the one that's really interesting, and there's a little bit of a grey area where brownfield becomes low carbon, which I'll explain, is the low carbon category. Now, for most people, this means they're now being applied to hydrogen projects and CCUS projects. But they're also being applied to electrification projects. So for most operators now, and if you'd been in the previous roundtable where my colleague Dario was presenting, there's an onus on operators to electrify and reduce their carbon footprint of their existing facilities. And JIP 33 is providing specifications that can enable electrification of existing facilities. And some of our operators categorize that as brownfield, and some of them categorize it as low carbon. So, it's in the data anyway. So there is that. What does JIP 33 mean? So, even though we have the 12 sponsoring operating companies, the success of the specifications requires the engagement of the entire supply chain. So this is a word cloud on which companies have participated in our public reviews since 2019. The bigger the name, the more comments they've put in. Not all comments are helpful, but most comments are, right? So, and like I say, we have over 250 companies, and we are extremely thankful for your participation within the process. We appreciate, because we are writing procurement specifications, our transparency is not exactly the same as it is if you participate in, let's say, API's update of 6D or something like that. But we would not be as successful as we are without your participation, and we very much appreciate your continued participation in the future. We typically send out supplier questionnaires on our existing specifications right before we update them. And we also make announcements on our public reviews of our draft specifications that are out. So we will have a draft specification for API 6D that is scheduled for July, I think, that we would obviously very much appreciate that. And we will be updating our actuator specification once API 6DX publishes, because some of the work IOGP have done between API and ISO, that API 6DX will become the actuator standard, and that will be published or co-published eventually under ISO to replace the existing ISO standards. So there won't be competing standards in the future, which is going to be extremely helpful to the industry. What's ahead for JIP 33? So we're focusing internally on a couple of things: adoption, which is persuading companies to actually use JIP 33, and then implementation, which is actually what you need to do internally to make JIP 33 successful within your organization. It sounds simple that you could just take a JIP 33 specification and put it in your specification library and the world's going to be perfect after that. It doesn't work that way. JIP 33 specifications require the buy-in of your engineering department and your procurement department, often require some realignment of your business systems to accommodate them, and require extensive outreach with your supply chain, both up and down. So that could be from an EPC up to an operator, and then down to an original equipment manufacturer and maybe their sub-supplier, which is very much the case if you're talking about valves and actuators, right? So we're focusing on that. If you've ever read a JIP 33 specification, and our current 6D one is a bad example, anything that was 500 and 600 when it was first published was written in a very old school way. Anything that's had a revision or has a 700 series, we've written within digital business systems. Systems such as Polarian and JAMA. These are requirement management business systems. So if everyone thinks specifications and standards went digital when they became available as a PDF. That is not what we consider to be a digital specification. A digital specification is one which you can import each requirement into your business systems and then align them so it's actually part of your business. And this is something that's being worked on with IOGP and with standards development organizations such as ISO, IEC, and API. And we're about to publish a guideline on writing digital requirements and how to implement them within your organization. And that's something we're continuing to do. And the other thing is, what are we doing with regarding to what we call emerging markets and applications? So this is CCUS, hydrogen, low energy, energy transition topics. So some of the new specifications that we're picking up within JIP 33 are have specific relevance to the energy transition and low carbon applications, while still being completely applicable to traditional oil and gas methodologies. So we are currently framing a specification for gas insulated switchgear, which has applications to unmanned facilities and to wind turbine farms. We have plans for power cables, which will have applicability to offshore installations and again to wind turbine farms. And we're also going to be looking at battery energy storage systems. We have been asked, are we looking at hydrogen? And the answer to that is no, because there's a whole bunch of other people looking at hydrogen. And right now, we think there needs to be some standards that come out first. So I think API is working on 6Z or Z as they would call it. Do you know when? Does anyone know when that's due for publication? So yeah, so that's not something we're not working on right now, but it has been reviewed. We came very close to kicking off cryogenic valves and I still think cryogenic valves may happen in a year or two. So what we're doing hopefully will have broader applications that will support the diversity of projects that you're seeing. So that was it from me, because I would like to leave time for some questions, if anyone in the audience has any questions, before the next session starts in 10 minutes. Thank you.
Anyone have any questions? If not, you can still catch David away from the podium quickly, because I understand he has a flight to catch later.
Absolutely.
So anyway, thank you so much, David, for your update and perspective on JIP 33. Looks like there's much more to come here. We will have roundtable 2 at 4:45, so in about, as he said, 10 minutes. So we'll have a short break in the meantime. Thank you.